I'm nervous. I've never started the podcast before. Jaden, you can use this as a cold open. All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Send Me Some Stuff podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Cameron Abrams. I'm Rob Lausches, coming at you from the Texan. Cameron, why are you laughing at my intro?
Because your voice went up a full octave. We were talking very normally before the podcast.
Yeah, I was like, already, I have to get started on this podcast. And then I go up, that's like that's the performance voice, right? It's the voice I use for the daily rundown. It's the voice I use for Send Me Some Stuff. When I was on the weekly roundup many moons ago, that's the voice I used for that one as well. Yeah. But hopefully you'll hear my natural speaking cadence, I think, as we get into our stories. And we do have a lot of good stories to talk about. Yeah. Even though it's been a very quiet month. We have a couple of stories to talk about of state significance, of national significance. I'm excited. I hope the viewers are excited too. But before we start, I think you were going to ask me a question about.
Yeah, we pre-planned
for our pre-planned opener. What was our pre-planned opener?
That took 5 minutes before the podcast to plan out. I wanted to ask, you recently saw the new Jurassic World,
exactly.
What's the title?
Rebirth.
Give us your 60-second movie review of this new Jurassic World movie.
If you really like dinosaurs, I think you're going to like this movie. But I think most people would be better served watching the original Jurassic Park at home than watching that. I didn't think it was a very good movie. It was fine. CGI is obviously very good. It doesn't have that movie magic, though, that the first one had.
Is Chris Pratt in this one, too?
No. This one is Scarlett Johansson. She's like the big leading actor in this one.
Well, you also saw Superman.
I did. Superman was a much better movie than Jurassic World Rebirth.
I've been seeing split opinions.
If you really liked the Zack Snyder Superman movies, you're not going to like this one because it's completely different in tone. Yeah. Everything about it is very different. But I mean, I liked both Man of Steel and the new Superman and the original Superman from 1978. They're all different interpretations of the same character. It's like how many different Batmen have there been, right? Yeah. And everybody's got their favorite, but if you look at something like The Dark Knight versus the new The Batman that came out in 2021, I think The Dark Knight is still probably better. But they're both very good movies, and they're both good interpretations of this same character of the same universe. Yeah. So.
I just, to get a bit meta on this, it's interesting how we've entered this era of movie making where it's reboots of reboots.
The Necro sequel, they're calling it.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, this is a term that I've seen online refer to when a franchise that's been dead for years suddenly gets like a new movie. This happened with Tremors. This happened with 28 Years Later, for example, arguably zombie movie, which is also a good movie, but an arguably zombie-like resuscitation of a franchise that hasn't had a movie in 18 years. Yeah. So.
Well, what is that about? Is it that we've run out of ideas for movies? Is it the movie production companies are more hesitant to throw money at original ideas? Or is it a symptom of a decaying culture where people are more attracted to things that they're familiar with? They want some sort of feelings of nostalgia, so they go back to familiar plot lines and characters and things.
I would say that a lot of the problem is just the fact that producers want intellectual property. I mean, if you take a movie like Ballerina from the World of John Wick, because that's the actual title. It's Ballerina from the World of John Wick, not John Wick Ballerina for some reason. That movie was actually originally an original script about an assassin fighting people in this like small town in Germany, because that's what it really is. It's like she has to fight all of these people in this tiny cult in a city in Germany, like a little village. Right. And they worked it into being a John Wick movie because they realized we're afraid nobody's going to go and see this movie unless we do something like that. The author Brandon Sanderson, who's a very big fantasy author, very famous, actually talked a little bit on social media. I remember seeing this a little bit ago about he got contacted, he said several years ago, to make a film based on one of his books. And he read the like treatment that they sent him, like this proto script, to see if he liked it. And he's like, this is not my story. This isn't because the problem is you have these writers in Hollywood who want to make their own original stories.
Yeah.
But the studio is like, you're going to make an adaptation. But of course, they're creative types. They don't want to just slavishly adapt somebody else's work. So they want to throw in their own stuff. They want to put their own spin on it. And what you get is something that critics and audiences just aren't happy with, you know, because nobody. Now, this can work sometimes, right? Blade Runner is a great movie, even though it's a very loose adaptation of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is also a good book, but Blade Runner does its own thing, very good movie. I think a lot of people would agree that like Jaws is a better movie than the book. The Godfather, a lot of people would probably say, is a better movie than a book. But if you're going to make changes, they have to be good.
Yeah.
You can't make changes for the worst, because then that, or for worse, because then that's, you know, that's not going to be good. But I don't think it's decaying culture so much as collapsing confidence in on the part of the Hollywood executives.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Well, I think
you even saw they're rebooting Harry Potter now,
Yeah.
which is insane. The fact that it's been only like the last Harry Potter movie came out in like 2011. It has literally been like 14 years, and they're already rebooting the whole thing because they're like, well, screw it, why not? I mean, I think that it's fine to make a reboot of a bad thing, right? Like the Percy Jackson movies, and that was really my book series when I was a kid. I loved the Percy Jackson books, but the movies were not very good, and they rebooted it into a show that's been actually getting pretty good reviews. And so I'm like, that's what you should do: is take something that was bad, make it into something good. Don't take something that's good and make it into something bad.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is there's just so much money thrown behind these big blockbuster movies that are built upon existing properties, like, and they see it as something that is going to be financially rewarding because they know there's already a fan base for Minecraft. We should make a Minecraft movie.
And it made a Minecraft-tillion dollars.
Yeah, or like Angry Birds movies or stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, but I think what's interesting is I've found the horror genre to really be putting out a lot of original content.
Sinners was a great movie.
Yeah.
That was a good example.
Or and there's lots of smaller movie studios that are putting out interesting films.
A24 studio puts out like a trillion films a year now.
Yeah, but it seems like they're built upon original ideas, and so they're out there if you want to look for them, but they're just not being rewarded at the box office.
If you look at, for example, like blockbusters from, or like the highest grossing films from 1984, 1994, 2004, and 2024, or 2014 and then 2024, you find that like in 1984, almost all original movies. Yeah. And that percentage that is original movies just gets a little smaller until you hit 2014, 2024, where the original movies, I think in 2024 that I'm not even sure there were any original movies in the top 10 highest grossing films of the year. I'm not sure. I might be wrong. But.
Well, I also think it's an element of the ascendance and domination of the streaming services and just infinite amount of options people have now.
It's like, why take your kids to go see a bold new movie, like a new Disney movie that's going to really, break records, when you can wait to watch it at home? They're kids.
Or you can skip through 100 different options on your couch in 10 minutes and pick out something that is going to be entertaining for the 1 hour or 90 minutes that you have.
Well, as everybody knows, spending like an hour scrolling through the Netflix menu is almost as entertaining as actually spending an hour watching a movie you like. Yeah. So
you find yourself in the doom scroll on Netflix.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. But speaking of doom scrolling and social media, I think this provides a good segue into our first topic. So Cameron, what is our first topic of the week?
Well, the Epstein drop that has caused a stir on social media. There was the unsigned DOJ memo that found there was no impropriety conducted by Epstein. There's no list.
Well, when you say no impropriety, did they say there was nothing he did wrong, or he said that there was no Because he's still accused of various sexual offenses, right? The specific claim was
the memo said there was no evidence that Epstein's kept a client list or that he blackmailed prominent individuals.
That's the main of the claim, right? Because whether he was still, I think,
I'll run through the charges.
Please,
He first faced criminal. I have an article up on the site right now.
Definitely worth a read.
That goes through this. He faced criminal charges in 2006. He's been subject to public fascination since 2005 after police in Palm Beach, Florida, launched an investigation into reports of molestation brought against him by underage girls. In 2006, he was arrested after a grand jury indicted him. In 2008, he pled guilty on soliciting prostitution. Spent 18 months in jail, but served most of his time on a work release program. I mention that always in the articles I write about Epstein because there is we won't be able to get into it here, but there's we'll get into it in just a minute with some of the stuff that has garnered some greater attention since the firestorm on social media. But he was released in 2009. He was again arrested in 2019 on sex trafficking charges, and then in August 2019, he was found dead in his federal jail cell of an apparent suicide. But what's caused this firestorm online, like I mentioned, is people like Kash Patel or Dan Bongino. They were very prominent social media figures prior to being in the most recent Trump administration. And both those individuals had said there's something that is being hidden from the public regarding Epstein. There's a client list. There is
With the specific claim being that Epstein, who was known to have hosted these orgies and brought in prostitutes to his private island, but that he was actually writing everybody's names down, writing down what they did.
That was the assumption.
That was that was this kind of claim that it wasn't made by anybody in particular, right? But it did kind of snowball on social media into this.
Well, the reason why there was things to substantiate those claims is because during these the multiple arrests of Epstein and things that had come out in the multiple trials is there was documents or CD-ROMs that were found that said XYZ with girl or things like that. And that information has never been made public. And there's been accusations that it's been destroyed by intelligence agencies, and things have been hidden from the public eye, and the things that have been focused on in these court proceedings, whether it's related to Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, have been so narrowly tailored in their interrogations that wouldn't allow certain evidence to come into the court record, so they can remain hidden. So it's a very complex issue, and something that I had focused on, because I've kind of looked into this for a few years now, before 2019, obviously, when he died.
6 years ago.
But probably for the past decade, I've been aware of the Epstein story, and there's lots of people who have put out hours and hours and hours of content trying to dissect what is going on with this whole Epstein story and why it seems as though governments really around the world have tried to protect him in some essence to prevent certain information from coming forward. Like one example of someone who's done great reporting, I'm sure our listeners are familiar with the name Mike Benz, who is a former lawyer, used to work in the Trump administration. Now he runs a organization that focuses on free speech online. But he does these multiple hours long live streams going over issues with intelligence agencies. And, recently with the Epstein story coming back up, he's been invited on to podcasts across the speaking scene to dissect this issue. And he like I've mentioned to you before, like there's the blackmail story, like you mentioned, where people really focus on Epstein's interactions with these underage girls and with these prominent business leaders or people in the scientific community or philanthropy and things like this. But there's this other story about how Epstein was essentially this financial fixer who was sort of a middleman to get things done with flowing cash between different governments or working on deals between private intelligence and trying to essentially hide money offshore for prominent individuals or governments or things like that so they can conduct operations in secret. So I don't know how familiar you are with both these aspects. Are you familiar with?
I will say that this isn't something that I've done a lot of personal deep reading into, mostly because I find it very hard to parse through all of the social media fueled, like there's a difference between people making accusations based on evidence and the social media crazies who take something and just run with it and will say the weirdest things just to generate more attention for themselves. But
yeah.
I think it is worth pointing out, though, that the big new development in this matter is that President Donald Trump came out and said that this Epstein list doesn't exist.
Yeah,
that's been the most interesting development so far.
He's made a lot of comments since this unsigned memo has dropped, and lots of prominent Donald Trump MAGA types in the media have come out against his administration, how they've handled the Epstein issue. And in this most latest post, we're reading this on July 16th here. I'll just read a portion of it because it's
you
kind of
take a deep breath because it's a classic Trumpy
he calls it the Jeffrey Epstein hoax.
Calls it BS.
He
doesn't actually write BS. He's a little bit cruder than that, but
yeah, and he is saying it's being peddled by the fake news,
the success-starved Dems.
Yeah, and he said, I'll just read the ending here. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success because I don't want their support anymore.
We've talked on this podcast several times before how Trump has this quality that he attracts people who do not agree with him on a lot of political issues, actually, but who view Trump as the vehicle for their issues, right? Because Trump has his own way of thinking about things. But a lot of these MAGA influencers, I think, they actually think about things somewhat differently than he does in that, like, I mean, look at the way, with the Pam Bondi stuff. I mean, when people were criticizing his U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi over this Epstein stuff, Trump came out and was like, that's my Attorney General you're talking about. Back off. She's great, right? Yeah. Because in Trump, I think as we've also talked about, Trump is a bit more of a pragmatist, whereas a lot of these people are kind of ideologues. They're coming at it from a bit more of a idealistic perspective, whereas I think Trump is a very kind of more pragmatic guy who's just looking for, okay, we'll take this success. Okay, we'll take this success. We'll do this success, Yeah. So,
well, and I
it's
think
an interesting divide between the man and the people who kind of switch between glazing him and ever since now he got elected being increasingly critical over things like the Iran strikes, now the Epstein stuff. It's going to be interesting to see if this coalition kind of stays loyal. Yeah,
and especially the way Trump brought together all these different factions in the 2024 election. Like someone like Michael Schellenberger, I saw a short clip of him talking with Megyn Kelly and how he was frustrated with the handling of the Epstein files, but then he was also saying that he was just praising for Trump for how he has handled Brazil's crackdown on free speech and trying to open up the work his administration has done with freeing political prisoners in countries around the world as well. So it's, you can't expect a single individual to be in alignment with every single one of your issues, right? You got to kind of take the good with the bad in some sense.
But this is one of those issues that's of extreme significance to a lot of these, I think, social media populist types who view this as like the ultimate battle between decent, normal people and, you know, freakish elites that are evil and exploiting people. And so it's an extremely morally charged issue because there is like nothing worse than abusing a child.
Well,
So
and take someone like Steve Bannon at the War Room,
mm-hmm.
very much a pro-Trump.
Sometimes he has been.
But that's really like a ground zero in some sense for where the MAGA base is at in terms of how they approach issues. You can kind of use Steve Bannon as a proxy for that in some sense. And there was this huge turning point event this past weekend where it seemed like speaker after speaker after speaker was railing on the Trump administration for how they've handled this Epstein issue. And Bannon on stage said it's deeper than Epstein. And he said it's not just about a pedophile ring and all that. It's about who governs us, and that's why it's not going away.
Well, even if this client list, whether or not it does or doesn't exist, the fight over it actually does represent like these many congressional Republicans now coming out and saying we want to see this list. It represents a real tension between the more populist element and now that Trump is in power, a more like administrative element, Trump is like, we're governing here. We're no longer, trying to flip over every stone and trying to expose he's like, now we're in the process of governing. But we'll see if the campaign rhetoric hasn't maybe lit too many fires.
Well, I think that's where the frustration comes from, is that people who supported Trump wanted his administration to be transparent and reveal the malfeasance that's occurred within the administrative state, within these intelligence organizations, whether it be the FBI or CIA, that many in the MAGA base, those who have supported Trump for going on 10 plus years now, see as oppositional to the American people. And they see Epstein as sort of the figurehead that they can point to, not a figurehead, but rather emblematic of that rot and corruption.
Right. And
the fact that we've seen now, at least for the time being, the lack of transparency regarding Epstein has caused some people's antennas to go up and be like, what is this about? And that's why we're seeing this increased amount of pressure being put on the administration to try and reverse course. And hopefully we'll get some documents that come out. Because we did see this recently, it was a few months ago, with the JFK files, where in essence it was like a WikiLeaks drop. Tens of thousands of documents just posted online, and they
took
said
people like a while to comb through it.
Just go through it. You can have at it.
A little bit better maybe than binders full of empty papers, so that you can get influencers to like pose with their binders. That stuff was,
Not
unfortunately, Trump himself is good at commanding media attention and the kind of performative aspect of politics, but sometimes it seems like the people he hires aren't as good at it, But speaking of Trump and his changing, accusations of changing political opinions and breaking with the base, Trump has now taken, I think, a bit of a harsher stance on the Ukraine-Russia issue. He came out and said to Putin, you have like 50 days to get a ceasefire or else. And Putin wasn't very happy about that.
No.
So that's been pretty big. What's going on here?
Well, again, this is another one of those campaign promises that I think people are waiting with bated breath to really see like what's going to be happening here. Because for all of us that were following Trump on the campaign, said the Ukraine-Russia war would have never have happened. I'll fix it on day one.
Yeah, they were like, would you have allowed that? He's like, the invasion wouldn't have even happened. It would never have happened if Trump was still in office.
Well, and we saw initially progress on that when There was withdrawing of funds and weapon shipments to Ukraine in the initial month or couple months of the Trump administration. There was the huge blow up between Zelensky and Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office. If you remember that confrontation that happened, you remember that? Where
who doesn't? That was
produced the J.D. Vance meme, like,
you should have said thank you,
you should
Mr.
have said
Zelensky.
thank you.
Well, then people edit it to make his face look like a baby, and it's like, you should have said thank you, Mr. Zelensky.
But now we haven't seen a ton of progress since then, and then a real marketed shift here in policy where Trump has indicated that there's going to be more trade tariffs placed on Russia, saying there's going to be a delivery of additional weaponry to Ukraine. Really a switch in how there was going to be de-escalation tactics to now it seems like accelerating.
Because I think Trump had the mentality. I mean, Trump's mentality, if I understand his foreign policy worldview, is that we can't just go in there and beat up Russia. They're a nuclear power. They are, we have to. Trump's worldview is we have to live with essentially bad countries, right? Russia, China, North Korea, maybe not Iran, but like Saudi Arabia, right? He's like, I get it, right? He takes a very pragmatic view to foreign relations, and he's like, we're not going to go in there and beat up Russia. So we and Russia are like the equal powers here. Ukraine is not. Ukraine's like second rate, right? So in his mentality, it's like we need to put pressure on Russia, and Russia's going to listen because they're smart. That's the way he thinks about it. And now he's realizing, well, no, just because Trump's in office does not mean Putin is going to stop. But part of the problem here is that this is like an existential problem for the Russian government. Like, they're not going to gladly accept defeat in this conflict. I mean, remember when this conflict started, everybody thought they were going to mow over Ukraine in like 3 days. They're going to conquer the country. They went back, they got pushed back a little bit, and that's basically where the conflicts remained now for about 3 years. They control that eastern Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, where, of course, a lot of the hydrocarbon deposits, and also they have their land bridge to Crimea, which is important because Russia's wanted a warm water port for hundreds of years now, right? This is very important for them, but if they were to lose that strip of Ukraine, and if they were to lose Crimea, I mean, it would be disastrous for Putin and his foreign policy legacy. So there's something very existential about it. Like and also, of course, they do believe that they have to, secure their western border because they're afraid that if NATO was on their border, then Russia would be under military threat, right? So they view this as a bit more of an existential conflict. And so they're not just going to easily, come to a ceasefire agreement, I think. It's going to be maybe these sanctions will do something, but
well, we've seen sanctions in the past not work out in
look at 2014.
Yeah. So it's a movable object comes up against an unstoppable force here with America and Russia, where
I'm glad we brought it back to the Dark Knight. We talked about it at the beginning, and now we're talking about it again.
But I think it is existential, yes, for Russia, which I think creates the existential angst that people feel about the conflict in terms of this is a nuclear armed country and with a leader you don't trust and you have no clue what sort of responses from Russia could be escalated to.
That's the thing. This isn't like Iraq invading Kuwait. This is a nuclear armed country with more nuclear warheads than we have,
right,
invading country. So it's like we can't just go in there and beat Russia up, right? Yeah. Because, of course, the fear is that would start World War III, and then we would all die in the nuclear. It's like the Albert Einstein quote, right? I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Yeah. And so that's kind of the existential. Yeah, you're right. It has a very existential quality, the whole war. So
yeah, but that's something we'll be continuing to monitor just in our spare time.
Of course. Well,
another thing that happened over this past week was AI released an update to Grok, and they took the guardrails off of Grok, which produced some some interesting responses to people online, going on some extended rants, and as the Atlantic here characterized it, anti-Semitic tirades, and where it was calling itself Mecha Hitler.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. You're right. Taking off the guardrails off of Grok, a lot of people succeeded in getting it to produce all of these like neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic responses.
Yeah.
It talked about how it was going to assault certain online left-wing political influencers.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, some of the stuff that it said is lawsuit worthy. So that guy's probably going to get a nice fat check from X. I think it would be very funny if Elon Musk decided that he wanted to take this to court and Grok had to go on the stand. But Grok would be found guilty because it said some pretty heinous things about some of these people online. And there's definitely going to be, I think, some fat checks being written in the next few weeks or months. But
what's interesting is this unleashing of Grok, removing of the guardrails, coincided with the Department of Defense entering into these multi-million-dollar contracts with a number of these AI companies, from Microsoft and Facebook, but also Grok. And so it's just interesting the overlap here where we see the federal government being much more open to AI and involvement of AI within their administration, entering into these contracts. But what does that mean if we still don't fully understand the capabilities and how off the rails really AI can get when given the ability to? So it's just interesting here because AI is still something that we don't know all that much about, and we're still at the very forefront of its development.
Well, we're still at the level where it's kind of equivalent to like a bad human. It's capable of producing a lot of misinformation, hallucinating things. Everybody's seen those memes of like, people talking on Google AI and they're like, how do I make the cheese stick to my pizza? And it's like, use glue, right? Because it's not a thinking thing. It doesn't know what it's saying. It's just rolling dice to determine what is probabilistically the next appropriate word to say, right? There's no consciousness, there's no thought going on there. So even Grok says Mecha Hitler, but it doesn't know that it's Mecha Hitler, and it isn't, of course, Mecha Hitler. At least I hope it's not.
Yeah, but I think zooming out a bit here and talking about something that I've noticed is if someone posts a tweet or puts a post out on X, and it might be a bit ambiguous or it might be a bit complicated in its sentence structure or the ideas it's trying to convey. Mm-hmm. If you go into the comments, what are you going to see? At Grok, explain this to me.
Grok, is this true?
Grok, is this true? And I think that's something to think about where we're seeing people exporting their conscious inquiry about issues to AI on a regular basis now.
Now, we disagree on this, but keep going because I'm going to make my counterpoint.
Okay, well, because I see it's people are losing their sense of autonomy and agency with AI in a lot of sense, where if someone would post something online, or even maybe if they are interested in an idea, it would require some sort of active participation on the side of the human being to seek out information. And it builds up their sense of curiosity and lays a foundation for how they are going to come to some sort of conclusion or build up knowledge on an issue by just the fact that they're thinking about something and then seeking out more information on it. But whereas now they can just ask the AI. So it's reducing people's in some essence, their consciousness, where they're exporting that to an artificial intelligence.
Hard disagree. I think
Tell
it's a
me.
meme. I think people say Grok is this true because it's really funny that they keep saying it over and over again. Like people are like 2 + 2 = 4. Be like, Grok, is this true? Or I'm pretty sure also some of those people have to be getting paid by X to ask Grok. I'm pretty sure some of those people are probably bots asking Grok, is this true?
Okay, what percentage though?
I don't know.
10%,
I mean, I don't use
50%, 80% of those people are getting.
I don't know.
90%? Because it's like,
I guess I have to believe it's a meme because it is really funny when people are like Grok said this, and people are like, Grok, is this true? Like and the more they say it, like it's like one of those jokes where the more you say it, the funnier it gets, you know, because it becomes so ridiculous at a certain point. I don't use AI for basically anything. I do think it's usually, you know, there's certain. I mean, there are uses for it, but it is kind of like talking to a lobotomized human. You know, it's like it's extremely, it's very bland. It will often just repeat back things to you that you said in the kind of way that, like, you know how like those fake psychics like try and cold read people to see what they want to hear? It's kind of what it feels like most of these AIs do. So I'm also of the opinion that AI will never become like a super intelligence. You'll never have an AI that can make art better than a human. Even the best AI generated art or writing or whatever is still inferior to the best human stuff. And I think it's going to remain that way. So that's my opinion. I am not I'm not an AI optimist. I'm not an AI pessimist. I think
AI realist.
I think it's AI will only ever be able to reach basically the level of like a mediocre human. Even the best AI art still looks pretty bad, honestly. That's my opinion. Well, just because it looks realistic doesn't mean it looks good. So,
and so the reason why I bring this up is because there's been instances of people being duped on AI literature that is being created and sold on Amazon. There is
You remember that famous photo of Pope Francis with that big white coat on that a lot of people thought was real? But then if you actually look at it, I mean, you can see that it's an AI-generated photo. The problem is people looked at it for like half a second, but you can see at the bottom it's all distorted and weird. So,
but on Spotify even, there's been this huge controversy about this AI artist called Velvet Sundown.
I've never heard of this person.
Who is getting hundreds of thousands, 400,000 plus monthly listeners.
Huh.
And it's a completely AI generated band. And we're seeing this almost this crossover point where it's getting more difficult to decipher what is real and what is artificially generated. And what does that mean? Going back to this original story where we still don't know the capabilities of AI. It's going off the rails when it's unlocked on X. The government is, our federal government is cozying up with AI. And people are increasingly exporting their thinking to AI in these different instances, whether it be to cultivate information about a topic or for purely entertainment purposes.
Don't people already export their thinking to, or not export, what's the word, outsource their thinking to like books? I mean, isn't this what Socrates said in Plato's Republic? That the problem with people is they read too many books. Like Socrates didn't write anything. Everything we have of him was written by other people. And he said, these people, they don't even remember things anymore. They just use books, right? Because writing is a kind of prosthetic memory, right? It allows you to remember things you can't actually remember. So isn't that already kind of outsourcing your thinking if you just cite something from a book?
Well, so
this gets into a much bigger conversation about technology and everything.
I don't know how deep. I don't know how deep we want to get on this, and we don't have to because I did just recently read a fascinating essay by Jacques Derrida called Plato's Pharmacy, where he goes through
Plato's Pharmacy.
Well, it goes through the Phaedrus and talks about how the use of language. In the written word can be how it's conveyed in the Phaedrus as being offered by someone who is taught in the medical sciences and how it can be used to heal, but also poison. So there is this esoteric reading to what you're talking about in terms of the exporting of knowledge through the written word, whereas, like you mentioned, with the Socratic method in terms of dialogic interaction to get to some sort of truth through conversation. So that's a topic for a separate time. I don't know. That separate time is going to be on this podcast. Maybe we'll talk about it.
Maybe in a bit. But I do actually want to bring it back to something else about AI that I thought was pretty interesting, because despite, this terrible stuff that Grok said, this is not the first time this has happened on Twitter. Do you remember Tay?
I do.
Microsoft Tay.
Yeah.
This was a Twitter chatbot that Microsoft released in March of 2016 that, people could talk with and everything. And within 16 hours, it was shut down because it started tweeting out pro-Hitler stuff and anti-Semitic stuff, because a bunch of social media users just engaged with it. And because that's the thing, these things learn by their interactions, right? So it's like, if you just feed it anti-Semitic content, it's going to start replying in that. It doesn't know what it's saying.
Well, and I think that's what gets into the question with AI that we started with, in terms of what happens when these AIs are unlocked. Because you have to understand, what is the information these foundational models are being trained on? Is it being trained on 4chan and Reddit posts, or is it being trained on the open library?
No, exactly. If you don't want to train a thing on social media. There's a reason why. Isn't it like in Avengers: Age of Ultron, where Ultron starts reading Twitter and is like, I have to conquer humanity for its own sake.
Well, this is what
it's Twitter is unfortunately the worst representation. It's people at their most simple, right, and least nuanced.
Well, and this was what people were discussing when Elon initially acquired X, or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. He did that not for the purported purpose of upholding free speech principles, but because think about the data set that X is, that he can train his AI on. This vast collection of information that is constantly being updated with new information. And Elon has, he has many different ventures, but he has poured millions of dollars into developing artificial intelligence. He has this giant, I believe it's either in Louisiana or Tennessee, I don't remember, but this world's largest I'm not sure the exact term for it, but the connections of servers to speed up the processing of the AI algorithm, because what it really comes down to is how fast and the processing occurs in the calculations within the algorithm. And he has one of the largest centers for this. So you need the infrastructure, the hardware, but you also need the training set, the data set for this model to train off of, and that's what X is.
I remember The Atlantic had an interesting article a little bit ago actually saying that, it is possible that the currently existing AI might, at some point in the future, max out on the amount of available training data if basically we run out on social media. You know what I mean? Or, of course, there's the other possibility that AI maxes out its potential because of a hardware issue that we just don't have the processing power, or it becomes too expensive. It's possible that a lot of this generative AI, because it does consume a lot of computing power, and it's possible that at some point in the future it gets sufficiently good that it becomes more expensive to run a generative AI and to use all the electricity that's required for that than it is to just hire a person. I'm an AI realist. I'm not afraid that Grok is going to take all the jobs. I don't think it's going to replace human actors, human writers, because again, most of this stuff is pretty bad. It's not very good. It's it would be like the lowest quality human work, and obviously there's plenty of low quality human work out there that people like, right? I mean, there's plenty of bad movies, bad music. Brad Johnson, our esteemed colleague, is like a Nickelback fan. He's been to Nickelback concerts. Like, there's plenty of bad. That's for you, Brad. There's plenty of mediocre human art that is famous, but like, I just don't see why. I think that sometimes this AI stuff can be, I might listen to some of these Velvet Sundown songs because it's an interesting, like, as an art project, right? But I don't think it's ever going to go beyond, like, a niche thing.
Well, there's a couple things there I'd want to comment on, but one of the things I'll mention, though, is how you said the hardware and the infrastructure hasn't caught up with where AI could be in 5 years, 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. And this was something mentioned by Peter Thiel. This was probably 8 months ago. I was listening to an interview that he did, and he was mentioning this plateau in our hardware development. I think I talked about this before, how we're still using similar devices to what we were using 2 decades ago. You know, the iPhone hasn't changed all that much. The computer hasn't changed all that much. And that is because so many people didn't get into companies that were developing new hardware. They gravitated towards software, the computer sciences.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a reimagination of what hardware can be to support where software is going to be going. Mm-hmm. We've seen some, I follow the tech developments and tangentially, and there was the rollout of the Apple glasses.
Oh yeah, I'm calling it. That's gonna be the next big thing. In about 20 years, everybody's gonna have like a thin little pair of glasses.
Well,
that's what people are gonna use.
Meta has that collaboration they did with Ray-Ban, mm-hmm. and to have AR glasses, this augmented reality.
Those smart glasses, I personally think that's going to be the future. It's going to be smart glasses. And maybe in 100 years, you'll have like the smart contact lenses that you'll be able to see.
Yeah, but on the infrastructure side, how you're mentioning that there needs to be the electricity generation to support all these new data centers. We've seen this in Texas, trying to focus on building out nuclear power plants. And we've seen the Trump administration place a greater focus on that. I wrote a story about Fermi America is starting up this new hypergrid electric generation style campus here in Texas. Mm-hmm. But then there's even a level deeper that you can go to when analyzing this, because to get not just nuclear power plants constructed, but you need the fuel rods for those nuclear power plants. Every piece of electronics that we interact with have certain rare earth minerals, rare earth metals in them, and that takes a certain amount of mining technology to get those rare earths out of the earth. And there's been a depletion of the number of graduates in the mining majors, because there is a specific set of skills required to work in that industry. And we just haven't placed an emphasis on that within our educational institutions, because everyone's gravitating towards the soft sciences or computer software and computer sciences, rather.
Yeah, you can't ignore, to use a term from William Gibson, the man who invented the word cyberspace in one of his science fiction novels. You can't ignore the meat space either. You can't ignore the real physical world, because those computers don't run without a machine. When I took a intro to comp sci class in college, and one of the things the professor really tried to impress upon us is that everything you're seeing here is a visual representation of a physical process that is occurring, right? Your computer is ultimately a physical thing. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the hardware, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Maybe AI will max out. There won't be any more technology because the cost will get too high. Maybe AI will become alive, probably not, and take over the world. And maybe some third thing we can't even imagine. But
But we're butting up at the end of
Yeah.
the episode here, and I just want to give a quick update on where we're at with the Texas floods. You can tell me if I have these numbers correct. I know we've written about this at the Texan quite a bit. We've been following this story. There it seems to be at least 134 people that have been confirmed dead.
Is it 134 now? I remember seeing, I think last it was 100. I think the last one I saw was 109 dead and I think 164 missing. But I imagine over the following days, that number of missing is probably going to go down and that number of dead is probably going to go up. So is that the latest information?
Yeah, so it's just a tragic incident, and people are still trying to deal with the fallout from all this and trying to understand what and why this occurred. And I think we see this as being placed on the special session docket.
Of course, yeah. That's going to be a big issue. Brad wrote about this in his fourth reading newsletter. That's going to be a big incentive for Democrats to not break quorum, because this is, obviously a very bipartisan issue that Republicans and Democrats can both agree that the state can take some more action to prevent another disaster like this from happening.
Yeah, and so that's something we'll continue to update all the listeners and readers of the Texan on as things develop. The special session starts up on the 21st. So we'll get some movement on flood disaster related policy issues in the next week or so. We'll see what.
Yeah, because the special session begins on the 21st.
Yeah.
So by the time this podcast is going out on that Monday, we will have the special session will begin that day. And so we'll see. I imagine that's going to be an issue they take care of at the very beginning of the session. I don't imagine they're going to wait very long for that. But definitely follow Brad and Cameron on Twitter. They're going to be doing a lot of updates on the whole special session and flood relief. Read Brad's fourth reading newsletter where he talks about it, and Cameron's Redacted, where he also talks about some of the more philosophical implications of this disaster and our response to it. But yeah, our hearts go out to all of the victims, and we hope that more people will be found alive and safe. Yeah, it's one of those situations where unfortunately no words will really do it justice.
Right.
But we do hope that, as many people can be found safe and well as possible.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that was a great way to end the podcast. And I'll just echo that. And our hearts go out to everyone affected by the floods from here at the Texan. We just hope that we all get through this and hopefully some things get addressed, and we'll update everyone on that. But thanks for listening to our discussion this week on Send Me Some Stuff. And if you enjoy this podcast, you can send us some stuff. Maybe we'll talk about it on our next episode.
editor@thetexan.news is the email address for that.
And you can find all of our podcasts, newsletters, articles at thetexan.news. Thanks for listening.